Oh, hi everyone, and welcome back to the LØUCO X Science series. I'm Dr. Jo Mennie, and today we're diving into a topic that stirs up more confusion and controversy than you might expect, and that is sweeteners, and more specifically, how they affect women's health. And to help us unravel all of this, I'm so excited to be joined by Daly, a registered nutritionist, women's health specialist, and founder of The Sugar Doctor. And Andy's work is all about empowering people to understand how sugar and sweeteners really impact our bodies, kind of beyond the buzzwords or the marketing spin. So thank you, Andy, so much for joining us today. I can't wait to get into this with you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, of course. I actually met Andy many years ago in the clinical setting. And I remember the first day that we met, like talking obviously all about what your area of interest was and just finding it all so fascinating. And you were so kind to answer all of my questions during that stage. And I just think, you are definitely the best person to help kind of women understand this. And yeah, so very grateful to have you here today. Thank you. So shall we crack on then and get into the questions? So essentially, we want to talk about kind of sweeteners, but also specifically because our audience is mostly women, to get into kind of how that impacts them. But just a little bit like for us to understand, like how on earth did you decide, oh, this is the area that I'm going to specialize in? Like what led you to this path?
So, as you know, I transitioned from being a lawyer to being a nutritional therapist after my youngest daughter was born. She was born with all sorts of issues which I couldn't really understand because she is my third child. And I just knew at the time she wasn't achieving the milestone she should have. She was diagnosed only about 5 years after she was born with her present diagnosis, which is an ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, mild form of cerebral palsy, and severe ADHD. And during that time, before her diagnosis, I started delving into the research. And I was really so impressed about, what I was reading, the profound impact that diet has on health, whether it's good or bad. And that's the reason why I became so fascinated and decided to go into it. So many years after she was born, I requalified in clinical practice. In our final year, we saw lots of clients who would walk in with very obscure symptoms, conditions that they had been suffering with and they didn't have any answers to. And at that time, sugar was being implicated in all of the chronic illnesses we are seeing today. But it was beginning to be implicated, and that was through the mechanism of inflammation. Sugar causes high insulin levels, which is a driver of inflammation, which is one of the root causes of all the chronic illnesses. And when I had to brand myself or think about how what I would do in practice, sugar is, in my view, it was then and always is, one of the main drivers of many of the chronic illnesses we're seeing today: hormonal imbalances, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, endometriosis, even some autoimmune conditions. And I was absolutely fascinated that simply removing pro-inflammatory foods from people's diet and including anti-inflammatory foods had such an impact on their health. So I decided to call myself the Sugar Doctor, because at that time there was the Food Doctor, Patrick Holford, and there is the Lunchbox Doctor. I don't know if you've heard of her, Jenny Teacher. She's amazing. And so I decided, because of the impact of sugar on health, to call myself Sugar Doctor. And I registered the trademark and also Sugar Safe. So obviously, to live in a world to prevent these chronic illnesses from happening is to try and avoid all these sugary processed foods. And so that's what motivated me. Understanding and appreciating that sugar has such a big impact on chronic illnesses.
And how long ago was that when your daughter was 5 years old?
Oh, so that was a long time ago. I mean, my daughter is 25, so 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, what strikes me is incredible is that obviously back then you were doing all this research and discovered all these things.
Yeah.
And whilst I feel there has been a bit of needle movement, like I still feel at the moment that probably a lot of what we're going to get into today, like, is not known or not discussed or not freely
Exactly.
given for people to make choice.
You couldn't say, I mean, a person to say that, for instance, a client who would have come to see me with issues that could have been hypothyroidism or autoimmune or something like that, to simplify it to that client and say, I think it could be sugar, would be, I would be considered probably a conspiracy theorist at that stage, and possibly even today, because you have to go through the mechanism. You have to talk about the impact of sugar on blood sugar levels, and then insulin, and then inflammation, and then how it works. But it's something that at that stage, fat was the big enemy still. And I think with many people today, it still is. And I don't think people understand that, or understood. When you talk about sugar, you're not talking about a cube of white table sugar. Every single carbohydrate we eat breaks down into a form of sugar. And that's why my motto is live sugar safe, not sugar free. We can't live sugar free. And so there are many different forms of sugar, as you know. So the impact of sugar on health will depend upon even certain healthy sugars, for instance, can impact the gut and cause inflammation at a certain time in a person's life. So it's very subjective. What might be pro-inflammatory for me might not be pro-inflammatory for someone else. Although, as a general rule, you can say that certain sweeteners, most all sweeteners, I would say, are pro-inflammatory, and many
super
processed
interesting.
foods. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the point that you touched upon about for the sugar side of things, not everyone responding the same way. I feel like that is the danger of the current social media trends, to be picking up your educational content from potentially, and that's your only form of reading, because one person might talk very loud about their story and people might think I'm just going to copy that. But it's not so simple as that, is what you're saying when it comes to the sugar
Exactly.
side of stuff. Yeah.
Everyone's unique. Everyone's body reacts in its own way. And so I think it's really important for people to realize that and to do their own research. I mean, it's quite easy these days to question things that they see on social media. So many people just go from one diet to another one, thinking that it's going to help them, and it doesn't.
Yeah. And also interesting what you were saying about, perhaps a few years ago, the kind of focus was, there was a kind of tipping balance of people saying, okay, well, it has to be no sugar then. Sugar was okay, well, no sugar. And you think, obviously, that's not your belief. It's, as you just said, like sugar safe and, making alternative swaps and things. But do you think then that's why we've got into this situation where sweeteners are just, everywhere? You pick up a packet in the aisle and they're all over the place.
Well, I think that, I was just looking the other day. I went to my local sort of corner cafe and I just bought a pint of milk, and I was looking down on the counter where normally you just see Kit Kats and all these types of chocolates. And I just saw all these protein bars, first high protein, keto, and there's just such a demand for these, obviously, because they were, and I think that is so dangerous. I think that everybody is looking for these keto snacks. Many of these have got these artificial sweeteners, these non-nutritive artificial sweeteners, and they really are so bad for us, because even though they might be keto friendly, they might not have any calories. They still cause us to have a sugar craving ultimately, and actually to overconsume sugary and processed foods. So they have a knock-on effect. While a person might think that they're eating a bar with no sugar because it's, little sugar because it has 0 calories, it might have erythritol or something in it. 2 hours later or 3 hours later, that person's going to have a sugar craving. Mark my words.
So interesting.
Yeah.
And then for those people who might not be familiar, could you explain what the difference between nutritive and non-nutritive sweeteners are? And then maybe as well, just explain what keto is for people who don't.
So nutritive sweeteners are the sweeteners with calories which provide energy. They're not necessarily good for us. All sweeteners have the same systemic effects. Examples of nutritive sweeteners are maple syrup, honey, agave syrup, all the other different types of syrups, sugar alcohols like xylitol, erythritol. Those are nutritive sweeteners. But then you have date paste. If you make your own date paste, that's different, because that could be a healthy option. Apple puree, banana puree, those are nutritive sweeteners. Non-nutritive sweeteners are sweeteners with empty calories, so 0 calorie sweeteners provide no energy. And these are the sweeteners that people are looking for who want to have no calories. They want to lose weight. They think that they're doing themselves a favor by having these 0 calorie sweeteners. Stevia is also a non-nutritive sweetener, and monk fruit extract. So for people who are keto, avoid carbohydrates, they want to function on ketones because they believe that this will provide them with more energy. It does have certain health advantages, but I'm not somebody who's in favor of any one of these. I just think that we should do everything in moderation. Keto, people are becoming keto obsessed, and also high protein. Protein, as you know, is very important for all of us, especially women. It's so important to include protein, high quality protein in our diets. But a lot of the proteins in these protein bars are not high quality protein. And these bars are all quite highly processed and will probably result in us having high insulin response, which could cause us to crave sweetness ultimately. And
That's so interesting. And it's, I suppose people think though that they're making the healthy choice because that's the way it's marketed. And then, again, for the understanding, there is a lot of packaging out there that will say natural sweeteners. So like, what do you find with your clients? Like, what are the common misconceptions when they think about natural sweeteners?
so to give you an example, agave syrup, for instance, is marketed labeled as natural, low glycemic, and diabetic friendly. Many of these nutritive sweeteners, like agave, maple syrup, and even honey, are high in fructose. And fructose is one of the most dangerous and misleading sugars because people associate it with fruit. And when it's concentrated and overconsumed in these sweeteners, it's very dangerous, especially for women. It's metabolized completely differently, fructose to glucose. It goes straight to the liver. And if we overconsume fructose, our liver gets overwhelmed. It doesn't respond to insulin. It also converts fructose into fat. It can result in elevated triglycerides. It can result in abdominal obesity, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And so these sweeteners are really quite dangerous. Normal table sugar, white table sugar, contains 50% fructose. So when you are having these natural sweeteners, which are so-called natural and low glycemic and diabetic friendly, they are extremely dangerous.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And then you mentioned before about stevia, which often gets marketed as a healthy option or falls into that kind of, no artificial sweeteners when they promote products. What's really the reality of stevia from your side?
The reality of stevia is the same as the reality of monk fruit extract, which is a type of fruit, xylitol, which is derived from the birch tree, and that is that these are all highly processed. Unless you're having the stevia leaf, which you put in a cup of tea, you're exposed to the same risks of any other sweetener, and that is that the sweetness in these sweeteners tricks the body into believing that it's going to get calories when in fact it doesn't. And that's when we get these sugar cravings, these sugar highs and lows, the insulin response, high insulin levels, and they cause us to overconsume sugary foods ultimately. So stevia and monk fruit and xylitol all have to have the same level of caution as other sweeteners.
So interesting.
My advice to people is to stick to foods as close as possible, that look as close as possible to their natural form. And when a stevia leaf becomes sort of a white powdery substance, it's a process. It goes through various different processes, and it's going to impact our body in the same way as other sweeteners.
Yeah, sure. And then the stevia, does there any impact on that about like kind of gut health as well? Does that, or
Yes.
not so
Well,
much?
all of these sweeteners, the research is out that these sweeteners lead us to have an imbalanced gut microbiome. They reduce the beneficial bacteria in our gut, and they increase the pathogenic or disease causing bacteria in our gut, which results in an imbalance or dysbiosis. And this can have a huge impact for women's health, because when you have dysbiosis in the gut, there's an enzyme produced by certain bacteria in the gut. It's called beta-glucuronidase. It sounds very complicated, but it plays a key role in the metabolism of various compounds and hormones. And if it becomes overactive, which it does when you have an imbalance in gut bacteria caused by these sweeteners and other things, it results in the reabsorption of certain compounds and hormones such as estrogen, which can contribute to estrogen dominance and conditions like endometriosis and even certain breast cancers. And also the balance of the gut microbiome ensures insulin sensitivity. So if we have dysbiosis or an imbalance in the gut bacteria caused by these sweeteners, our bodies are going to become less responsive to insulin, can lead to insulin resistance, which is associated with PCOS and obviously type 2 diabetes. So these sweeteners have a huge impact on the gut and our health.
Yeah. And it's crazy because I think people are just looking at the kind of calorific win, I suppose, that in their eyes from using these products. And I suppose products are being marketed with, the nutritional information on the back, and, to get that sugar close to zero, then actually, but these pathways are still happening. The insulin is still being triggered, the gut is still being affected. And it's almost as if we're just focusing on calorie rather than thinking, okay, but what's the processes of these chemicals that we're putting in?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean,
interesting.
the effect is downstream. So this is a thing. Most people just they're counting their calories. Very, very many people these days still count calories. And, no matter what you say, it's very hard to convince a certain mindset that they shouldn't have these sweeteners for all these different reasons. But ultimately, they cause weight gain.
Yes, the studies
In
on
the
that are
long term.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can link some of these studies, but I find that interesting, that temporary weight loss that you get with them just goes straight back on. It's what studies have
Yeah.
shown
But
after.
also, I mean, I'm sure that many people will find that as soon as they've had a sweetener, about 2 hours afterwards, if you avoid them altogether, you'll find your body doesn't want any sweetness. It takes a long time. It could take 1 week, 2 weeks. And if you're addicted to sugar, you get sugar withdrawal symptoms. But after that, your body won't crave any sweetness. But most certainly after you have these sweeteners, which are extremely sweet, 2 or 3 hours later, you will crave something sweet and be very hard to stay on your weight loss program.
Yeah. And then for those women in particular who might be, so, maybe they're struggling with PCOS, endometriosis, diabetes, who, might be looking at the nutritional tables a little bit more. What I'm understanding from what you're saying is actually the sweeteners can actually worsen those conditions. Is that
Yes,
through this process of
absolutely.
inflammation? Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not really treating the root cause of, because that's probably inflammatory processes in
Exactly.
themselves.
It all
Yeah.
drives inflammation. So
Yeah.
these
Like a circle.
sweeteners will cause ultimately our insulin levels to rise, which will drive inflammation and worsen conditions like PCOS or endometriosis or type 2 diabetes. We know that high insulin levels stimulate the production of male hormones, androgens like testosterone, and that increases PCOS symptoms like body hair, acne, irregular periods. And that's insulin resistance and high insulin levels, which are implicated in that. And that's all driven by the sugar or the sweetness.
Yeah, yeah. I just have one more question about the health aspect of it. Do you have any understanding of how this kind of sweetener consumption during pregnancy or infertility, women in those scenarios, what would the advice be to them is in terms of sweetener use?
To stay away from them.
Yeah.
For sure. Women thinking of conceiving, I mean, there's very little evidence out there, direct evidence. It's hard to do these studies. It's probably immoral to do these studies, but I think there is a lot of evidence out there, talking to people who were pregnant at the time and consuming these sweeteners. And also when it comes to obviously fertility, obviously PCOS, insulin resistance, a possible loss of fertility. But when it comes to the child and maternal diet, a person who consumes lots of sugar or even sweeteners will predispose the unborn child to sugar cravings later in life. And this can lead to childhood obesity. So,
I love that area of research, the emerging kind of epigenetics of it. I find it so
yes,
fascinating. We should definitely do another conversation on that,
yes,
as well as kind of those, first 1,000 days of the child's life,
yeah,
because the
yeah,
research is so fascinating about how the programming, the
yes.
genetics
And
can be.
that's all new research. I mean, there was a time when I was pregnant, for instance, when, I look back when my mother was pregnant and she was smoking, and many people were.
Yeah.
And, even the alcohol, pregnant women were told that they could have a certain amount of alcohol, a day or a week, and that it wouldn't affect the unborn child. Certainly diet drinks, with all these sweeteners, they were told that no, that, nothing can bypass the placenta and get through to the baby. But we know that now that that's very different.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting. And yes, definitely let's come back and do a little bit more on that, because
Yeah.
even from this year, the stuff that's being produced is so fascinating.
Yeah.
So for kind of women who are wanting to reduce sweeteners, kind of both artificial and these kind of natural, which we kind of understand just come from plants, but obviously they're heavily processed, but it's a marketing claim to be calling them natural. How can women kind of reduce their sweeteners? What are some tips that you could give to women?
I'd say that these natural sweeteners, which I was talking about earlier, like just experiment in baking. And if you're thinking of baking, use date paste, sort of soak them in water, mash them, and put them in your baking. Obviously, it's trial and error. Try apple puree, try banana puree, whole fruits. And my advice generally to people who have a problem with sugar is to try and try 2 or 3 days without sugar. Try and have your yogurt. We're now talking about added sugars, and we're talking about sweeteners. We're talking about anything sweet. So if you find that you have these sugar cravings and or sugar addictions, you should try as hard as possible to withdraw these, eliminate these sugary foods from your diet. But have some yogurt with some apple puree or banana or whole fruit. There's absolutely nothing nothing wrong with fructose in whole fruit, because it contains the fiber and all the nutrients you need. So have the fruits and try and wean yourself off all these sort of processed sugars and sweeteners as much as possible.
Yeah. And that point you're saying about the fiber, rather than just focusing on zero sugar or high protein, it's kind of like, okay, we need to like look at everything, like get the protein with the fiber, and then your sugar will land much better. The real sugar. Yeah. Amazing. And all of these tips and everything can be found in your Live Sugar Safe program, which is on your website. Is that how people find it? Get in touch with you? Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Andy. I feel like it's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm already planning the next set of questions for our next interview. And yes, we shall be posting some collaborative recipes together, which we're excited about. So everyone can try said high protein, high fiber ice cream, which is coming out soon. And yeah, if you have any questions for Andy, then obviously pop them in the comments below and we can get back to you. And we can do another session and try and answer any more of these questions. All right. Thank you so much, Andy. I'll speak soon.